I'm Jen and welcome to my channel. So if you've been following me on YouTube, I haven't really posted in a year, but the most recent videos I had been making were neuroscience videos based off of research on different mental health things such as bipolar disorder, depression, and so on. And I really like making those videos, but I've been thinking about it and I want to make things that are a little bit more usable, a little more direct, as opposed to just explaining kind of the neuroscience behind disorders. I really like that stuff and find it really interesting, but I also want to share some things that I have, like tools that I have found through research and through self-help, and things that have actually been working for me in my own mental health journey over the past 10 years or so. As some of you may know, my personal growth and mental health journey really began in my senior year of high school after my dad committed suicide. I started learning about neuroscience. I said that weird. I started learning about neuroscience and trying to figure out if some brains were destined to be depressed for life, if some brains were destined to commit suicide. I know it sounds funny saying brains, but I was thinking like if some people are destined to commit suicide because of their brains. And I found the movie called Happiness, which is a movie about positive psychology. So that was my first introduction to positive psychology way back when in 2012. So I was really into learning about this stuff on my own and through school. So once I started college, I studied biology with a concentration in neuroscience, but I also took a lot of psychology classes and human development classes, and finally one positive psychology class my senior year. So I really learned a lot then. And then when I graduated college, I entered the world of self-help and yoga. I wasn't really doing any of that in college. In college, I had a great time and was very happy and just having fun. I had a social life and I was busy with school. But I think when we leave college, life gets a little less fun. And I learned about this world of yoga and coaching. And I found all that stuff really motivating and exciting and helpful. But after being enveloped in that kind of stuff for about 3 years, I realized that it didn't cover everything. You can't just push and motivate yourself and try to be productive all the time without healing some of the things that you might need to heal. Like it's a kind of like positive or spiritual bypassing the negative things. Like you can focus on positivity as much as you want, and you can focus on productivity as much as you want. But if you're ignoring something that needs to be healed, there is an issue there. If you're running so fast towards your goals because you're running away from something, there's an issue. So after about 3 years of being more interested in self-help than actual neuroscience or therapy, and after going through a breakup and the pandemic, I came back to my hometown and I started studying clinical mental health counseling, and also got back into therapy for my first time since college. So there was about a 3-year gap there. And it's been much more helpful than just doing the self-help stuff alone. So I think that, I just want to share both sides of it and share that there are good things in the coaching world, but then there's also some things that you might need therapy for. And then I also want to share the science of it all. So I've been making a list of a lot of the things that tools that I've used that have helped me and that are based in research. I also want to share tools that have helped me that might not be based in research. And then I want to share neuroscience of things like stress and anxiety, and then tools maybe based in neuroscience or anecdotal tools that work, and tools that are researched on, but like distinguishing between which ones are researched, which ones aren't, and then you can choose from there what you want to go with. But yeah, I thought I might read you some of the things that I want to make videos on in the future. So the first video I want to make is going to be on recovery-oriented CBT. It's actually a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, which I will explain in that video. And it's actually meant for people who have just had like a psychotic episode or are dealing with schizophrenia. But I found that it could be really helpful for anyone. And I'm not exactly sure why it's not just used for like depression, and I'll probably do some research into what's the difference between recovery-oriented CBT versus CBT for depression. But just when I was learning about it, it sounded really interesting, and I started using it on myself, and I really liked it. So I do want to share recovery-oriented CBT with you. The next is behavioral activation, the science of it. So basically, behavioral activation is especially used for people who are depressed. And it's the theory that when you take action, you actually gain more energy, even though when you're depressed, you feel like no action is what you need to do when you need rest. But I feel like behavioral activation is also important on the other end. If you are being too busy and too activated, for people with bipolar disorder, that could lead to a state of mania. And then for people not with bipolar disorder, it could still lead to stress and overwhelm and anxiety. So I want to talk about both ends of the spectrum for behavioral activation. I also I wrote down stress, anxiety, and overwhelm. I want to know more about the science of those things because that just interests me. And then also maybe some neuroscience or just therapeutic research on media and internet addiction, as well as avoidance and procrastination. I think those things all go together, but there might be slight nuances between those things. But I find that really important. I'm sure that's something that we all struggle with. And I think trauma is something that we've been talking a lot more about in just our culture. And we're realizing that trauma can be these huge, crazy, terrible things that happen, but trauma could also be smaller things that might have happened to you, but that affected you greatly throughout your life. So I kind of want to look at the difference between the typical traumatic experience that we think of, like a car accident or seeing someone die, versus maybe a trauma of just being bullied really badly one day in elementary school, and see how those types of things affect our brain and how different it might look between the two. And I'd like to share about EMDR. So that is using bilateral stimulation to access maybe traumatic memories or just memories that have affected you and reprogramming them in a way. EMDR has been proven, at least in a bunch of research, to be very successful in helping people with their symptoms. So I want to look at the research of that as well as figure out some of the neuroscience behind EMDR. The theory is when you experience a traumatic event, your brain kind of freezes. But then when you do bilateral stimulation, such as following a finger back and forth or tapping on each side of your legs, by stimulating both sides of the brain, the two hemispheres start communicating again and unfreeze, and you're able to access those traumatic memories and change the meaning of them possibly, or make them affect you in a negative way less. I don't know exactly, so I want to look at the research and explain that to you. I also want to learn more about somatic experiencing. So that is another way that to deal with trauma through feeling things in your body. And I don't know much more than that, but it's interesting to me. I want to learn more about how you can use art therapy for trauma. I think it works in a lot of the same ways, because essentially when you have experienced trauma, the language areas in your brain, at least someone told me this, I have to look up and see if this research is true, but there's less blood flow in the language areas of your brain when you're thinking about a traumatic event. So doing things like coloring and making art about the experience actually allows you to access the traumatic memory more than just talking about it. So I want to look into that and explain that further. I want to look at the research and neuroscience between heartbreak and loneliness, asking for a friend. And I also want to look at the idea of unblocking narratives. So this kind of overlaps with narrative therapy, but also there is a teacher online named Lacey Phillips who does a lot of kind of spiritual work and unblocking kind of things like your reparenting, like looking at your past and reparenting and re-experiencing the things you grew up with and doing shadow work. It's kind of very spiritual stuff, but it's also based on a lot of mainstream therapy and neuroscience research. So I kind of want to look at how those things work together. And a note in general, I've noticed a connection between narrative therapies, CBT, and EMDR and other trauma-based work. So I kind of want to make a whole video on showing how those blend together. And I think another key to looking at mental health and happiness is understanding identity. And I want to see, like, what does identity really mean, as well as maybe how does looking at our future self, our highest self, affect us, and is it a good thing to do, or does it kind of make you feel not as good about your current self? I want to like look at research around those things related to identity. And I want to talk about habit formation. I especially like the book Atomic Habits. And the thing is, it works for me sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. So I kind of want to learn more about why things like habit tracking like work sometimes but not always. And I came up with this term myself, but mental orthorexia. So orthorexia in general is, it's like instead of anorexic, someone who is really obsessed with eating the healthiest foods. And for me, I don't necessarily or really at all have like physical orthorexia. Like I'm not too worried about the foods I eat or how much I exercise, but I feel like I have like a mental health or orthorexia where I'm thinking about mental health all the time. And I know it might be kind of contradictory to be making this video on it, but I want to know like how much is too much thinking about your own mental health, and where does self-love come into the play of that, or if it does, or maybe self-love would just be a different topic. And last, maybe looking at the neuroscience and science behind joy and eudaemonia. Eudaemonia is basically like, instead of hedony, it's things that bring you happiness that are all more based in like internal things, such as like having personal meaning, helping others. But that is something I think about a lot too. Like, is hedony, being hedonistic and just doing things that are pleasurable, is that bad? I don't think so. Especially if the hedonistic things aren't things that are going to affect you negatively in the long run. Like, I think it's hedonistic that I like to go paddleboarding and look at the sunset, but there's no really bad side effects to that. That's a good thing to do. That just gives me pleasure. So maybe seeing where the balance between hedony and eudaemonia and like kind of just what a joyful, happy looks like, at least for me. So I know I just introduced a lot of topics, but I just wanted to give a brief introduction into the playlist that I want to be working on. And I'll probably reference this video in the different videos I make, just so if someone finds one of those videos for the first time, like if someone's first video is watching the recovery-oriented CBT video, I can let them know, hey, come back to this video just to see what other topics I want to talk about and the broader context of why I'm talking about recovery-oriented CBT. But yeah, I hope you like this video and I hope this playlist will interest you. All right, bye.